Okay, so in Kentucky, we have common math, English, and science core standards. Which were passed by Terry Holliday in 2010, the chief of Kentucky's State Education Board, after Kentucky's General Assembly, including James Comer, voted for something similar in April 2009. Science standards were eventually implemented in 2013. Kentucky's General Assembly, Frankfort, Kentucky State Legislature, passed Senate Bill 1 in April 2009, which gave Terry Holliday license to impose Kentucky's Common Math, English, and Science core into the curriculum of Kentucky schools in February 2010. Kentucky actually got national publicity for being the first state to adopt some type of Common Core standards. Out of the 50 nifty United States, we were number one. And that's something we should be proud of. The Bluegrass's Common Math, English, and Science core standards piggybacked off of Kentucky's 1990s CARA. In 2009, the Kentucky General Assembly passed Senate Bill 1, which was signed by Governor Steve Beshear. This legislation mandated new academic standards focusing on the critical knowledge, skills, and capacities needed for success in the global economy. Kentucky's 2009 Senate Bill 1 mandated that every Kentucky student who attends free, public, socialist government welfare universal education school to be prepared for a higher education or career. The Senate Bill 1 Steering Committee supported collaboration with the National Governors Association, the NGA, the Council of Chief State School Officers, the CCSSO, and then led by former Kentucky Educational Commissioner Gene Wilhoit in the Common Core Standards Project. Terry Holliday also served as the president of the board of the Council of Chief State School Officers, one of the private nonprofits that develop and owns the copyright to the Common Core Standards. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, ACT Incorporated, and College Board all helped to design Common Core. Terry Holliday also pushed Arne Duncan back and was able to postpone getting Kentucky some science standards until 2013. So 2009, the legislature passed a bill saying let's change the curriculum. Terry Holliday changed the curriculum in 2010 when he imposed math and English standards, forcing Kentucky students against their will to study English, know how to read and write, and to understand basic math. But we didn't get science standards until 2013. All these are good things. So now Kentucky has its own Bluegrass Common English, Math, and Science core standards. But we haven't had the Common Core standards for social studies, Spanish, or any other requirement, at least not yet mandated by the state. The state mandates actually a whole host of other curriculums, but it's not considered in the umbrella of Common Core because we haven't compared the benchmarks to the other states. Kentucky has Bluegrass Common Core standards, and so far we've made math, English, and science the core standards. Reading, writing, arithmetic. That should be actually taught by the time you're in third grade. In kindergarten, you learn how to read, and then by the first grade, you read to learn. So you should know English and math. I mean, all these should be mandated, by the time you're in third grade. I feel like you can get your basics with all of this. And it is not centralized bureaucratic control because we have school boards in Kentucky. So once they mandated the math, English, and science as the core standards, it was up to the school boards to implement whatever new math, science, English, and social studies standards they wanted to implement. It's not central bureaucratic control. It's not an Obama takeover. It's not centralized bureaucratic control unless you consider school boards bureaucrats, which would be wrong since they're elected officials in all 120 counties in Kentucky. Administrators are your bureaucrats. So from Fulton County to Pike County, from Callaway to Boone County, there are school boards in every county raising your taxes every year whenever they feel like it. Usually it's about a quarter increase on your property taxes. Here's the governor on Common Core.
In this century. Now, a lot of exciting things are already going on out there, and I know that you all know many of them. Senate Bill 1 was passed recently, and Commissioner Holliday and the Department of Education is working to implement Senate Bill 1, revising the academic content standards to ensure alignment from one education level to the next. Now, there's also a national effort going on called Common Core Standards Initiative. This is where states are getting together to develop a common set of college-ready or career-ready standards so that somebody who graduates at a proficient level, whether they're from Kentucky or Idaho, will have the same knowledge. And they will also gauge those standards and tie those standards in and benchmark those standards to international standards. Another effort going on involves the Gates Foundation and the Southern Regional Education Board. They're both working with Kentucky to accelerate college and career readiness.
Now let's see what Matt Bevin, Will T. Scott, James Comer, and Hal Heiner have to say about math, English, and science standards.
Any of us?
Well, Common Core.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Sure.
Common Core, are the standards that's set up by the educational institutes across the United States, and now they've been adopted or they're being pushed out by the United States government. And they're doing curriculums and books and everything. And I'm telling you, it's not good for Kentucky. It's just really not good. It's not good for Kentucky because they're taking away, our civics. They're taking away our geography of Kentucky. They're taking away all these things that I've
Who's taking it away, Justice Scott?
Well, the program that we're adopting here in Kentucky, and we're moving away from it, I acknowledge that, and we're moving pretty quick. But that's taking away the right of our teachers and our principals and our top educators in Kentucky to teach us about our heroes here. I mean, if you look at the education in the United States, you don't see Daniel Boone discovering Kentucky anymore and not on drugs. You don't see Davy Crockett,
Let me weigh in on this real quickly.
Yeah,
At the end of the day, this is the premise behind the creation of what are officially known as the Common Core State Standards was arguably a good one. We wanted a kid who graduated from Alabama to know what a kid that graduated from Arkansas, to know what a kid that graduated from Alaska, all know the same thing on the day they graduate and are prepared to move on into the post-secondary world or the working world. It's good in theory, but so are many things. But it is flawed with respect to how it has attempted to be delivered. The Common Core Standards are not serving that purpose. There were only two educators, literally only two academicians, people who had spent any time in education, who were involved in the creation of those standards. One was an English professor from the University of Arkansas, the other a math professor from Stanford University. Neither one of them approved these standards. Neither one endorsed the standards. Each has washed their hands of it and said, we are not actually accomplishing what we set out to do. The original desire to benchmark ourselves against international standards has not indeed happened. And in fact, we've dropped that as a metric. And the math professor from Stanford said if we were to follow these measures, we would in fact be at a minimum 2 years behind all those very other developed nations that we say we want to compete with. It is not working. We do need metrics. The Fordham Institute has long studied this issue, and there are metrics like those used in Massachusetts that would be better. We need standards, high standards. We need to empower local educators and stop turning them into test providers. We're over-testing our kids. We're stressing our teachers.
Which is not a part of Common Core, but that's...
Well, it is, but Bill, this is the reality. It is because of the curriculum themselves and the teaching to that curricula that comes down as a result of these standards that we have turned these students into little test takers and turned the teachers into administrators, and it's robbing them of the ability to teach.
Let's hear from Mr. Comer, Mr. Heiner.
Okay.
Well,
go ahead.
Well, Bill, I have two children in the public school system. I went to public schools, TJ went to public schools, our children are now in public schools, and it's changed since we were in public schools, and it's changed for the worst. Common Core are just standards that we all want high standards for our children. And when Common Core was invented, we all agreed with that because we want
you voted for it.
Well, Senate Bill 2 was a purpose to create higher standards. But what's happened since then, the Obama administration has tried to get their foot in the tent.
Now, Mr. Comer, how has the Obama administration done that?
Because they've tried to hold a carrot out for all the poor states with grant money like Race to the Top funding, and said if you accept this grant, then we're going to have you change your standards even more to comply with Washington bureaucrats.
So you
we
think
need
it's
local decision making. I want to return local decision making back to our local schools and out of the hands of our Washington, D.C. bureaucrats. If you talk to teachers, and I talk to teachers every day, some of our best friends are teachers, they're frustrated. We're losing some of our best teachers in the state every day because they feel like they're having to teach to the test and not teach the way that they were taught, to try to teach kids to learn to have skills that are needed in the job.
Mr. Bennett, how would you replace it, and what would it cost? How many years would it take to redo what is now the system in Kentucky?
Yep. I'd like to get back first on Common Core and why we need to eliminate it in Kentucky. It didn't start out initially as a federal program. The goal was to raise the standards across the country. A noble effort to raise standards. I believe in very high standards, rigorous standards, but what it has morphed into is the opportunity for the federal government to get more involved in education. And I think that's the concern that you may hear across the country. Well, first in Race to the Top, extra points for money if you sign up for Common Core. Now the next step today is, well, you can't pay for testing, we'll pay for your testing, for your state testing under Common Core. And all of a sudden you have this direct connection to Washington. Now we need to have very high standards. We need to be cognizant of the standards around the country and make sure that our students are striving for the highest standards. But ultimately we have to have a firewall between Kentucky and Washington, D.C. If we look at the examples in healthcare, if we look at the examples of natural resources, if we look at examples of agriculture, quite frankly, in attempting to come in and regulate every mud puddle on farms in Kentucky, it's time to keep a firewall between the federal government because it's just another vehicle to come in and control education in the states.
So Barack Obama had nothing to do with Kentucky's common math, English, and science standards. You shouldn't be afraid of black people anyways. It's stupid. It's racist. It's 2015. Also, let the gay people have their day. There's no federal legislation to overturn when you're talking about the repeal of Common Core. So when they're saying we must undo Common Core, you can't undo Common Core. There is no federal legislation to undo. You can't pass a law to undo it. You can't, it's done by the states. Terry Holiday, the Kentucky's Commissioner of Education, our own state Department of Education, the head of our own state Department of Education is the one who give us math, science, English standards. So I have to question whether or not the Republican candidates even understand how government works. Kentucky was the first in the United States to adopt our own state's Common Core, as did 45 other states who also adopted some type of Common Core for themselves. Kentucky was the first state in the nation to adopt Common Core, and we got great publicity for that. It was one time Kentucky surpassed her negative stereotypes and didn't act like total backwards, illiterate, non-voting dumbasses. Kentucky has had many notable achievements where we were first in the nation, and Kentucky should be proud of these notable achievements. While we were the 15th state to join the United States of America, even though we had considered joining the Spanish Empire so we could get control of the Ohio River, Kentucky was the first state to join the Union west of the Appalachian Mountains on June 1st, 1792. We were the first state past the Appalachian Mountains to say, all right, we're going to join in with the 13 original colonies. The 14th state was Vermont. Louisville, Kentucky was the first place in America to use the secret Australian ballot in 1888. So you go into the voting booth today, you write your, you vote for the people that you want to vote for, fill in the bubbles, and it's secret, it's private. That's the Australian ballot. We did that the first in the entire United States in 1888. Kentucky was the first southern state to pass the Civil Rights Act in 1966. Martin Luther King Jr. actually marched on Frankfurt for the 1966 Civil Rights Act, of which Rand Paul was completely against. 1966 is when Kentucky decided to integrate. That's fantastic. That's a great legacy. The first southern state to say, all right, we've been doing things wrong, let's integrate. Kentucky was also the first state to overhaul and modernize, so to speak, their judicial branch in 1975. The entire section of Kentucky's Constitution in regards to the judicial branch was completely gutted out and replaced with this 1975 amendment. This was also something that the nation had congratulated Kentucky on doing. First in the nation, 1975. Also in 1975, Kentucky finally ratified the 13th, the 14th, and the 13th Amendments, the so-called Civil War Amendments, which gives black folks citizenship and the right to vote. We didn't do it right after the Civil War because the Confederates had took over our state government, but we eventually, retroactively, in 1975, passed those amendments. These are good things. We are, that's us fixing something that should have been fixed a long time ago. Kentucky was #1 in the nation with the standards-based movements with 1990's CARA, the Kentucky Educational Reform Act. CARA was sweeping in its changes in Kentucky's educational system, including the inclusion of SBDMs, its SEEK formula, which sought to make all public schools in Kentucky receive the same tax dollars per capita, no matter if they were raised in a rich or poor district. We were #1 in education reform in 1990. In 1997, the Kentucky General Assembly completely revamped higher education in the Commonwealth with the passage of the Post-Secondary Education Improvement Act of 1997, House Bill 1. House Bill 1 mandated that the University of Kentucky and U of L become a top public research university by the year 2020. This 1997 law also created several new entities: the Kentucky Community and Technical College System, KCTCS, Kentucky Virtual Campus, KYVC, Kentucky Virtual Library, KYVL, Kentucky Virtual Schools, KYVS. In 1998, the Ford Foundation and Harvard University gave Kentucky the Innovation in American Government Award. Kentucky was the first state to pass Kentucky's Common Math English Core Standards in 2009 and 2010. In October 2013, Kentucky was the first state to implement Obamacare by way of the state's own private insurance portal website, Connect.com. 640,000 Kentuckians have signed up for Obamacare so far, since most of them were teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. Obamacare was good for Kentucky, and you won't hear any of the governor's candidates say that, except for Jeff Young and I. Also, in 2013, Kentucky was the first state in the United States to begin hemp production. So these are good accomplishments. These are notable achievements that we should be proud of. So Kentucky, let's smash this culture of ignorance bullshit and start being proud of good, progressive, world-class measures. I mean, one of the biggest victories that Kentuckians don't take credit for was when we won the Civil War. Kentucky won the Civil War. We were on the right side of history. We won the Civil War, but instead you have all these backwards ingrates, racist, white supremacists who want to side with the losers. The election of the long-shot third-party candidate Abraham Lincoln, Kentucky born and raised, severed the nation in half after many southern states seceded out of the United States Club in 1860 because the 1% elite, 10,000 slave owners, wanted to keep their slaves, a peculiar institution that most of our founding fathers engaged in. Kentucky chose to fight for Abraham Lincoln, for the United States, against the Confederacy, against slavery. And we were right in doing so. 100,000 Kentuckians fought for the Union compared to 25,000 white supremacist racists who fought for the Confederacy. And the 25 white racists who fought for the Confederacy were fighting so that the 10,000 slave-owning, aristocratic, plutocratic, 1% owner-banker class could keep their slaves. Most whites in the South didn't own slaves. They were fighting so the owners, the 10,000 people who were running the South, could own the slaves. And then so today, when people wave Confederate flags, what, you're saying that you care about those 10,000 slave-owning, fucking rich-ass pieces of shit in the 1800s? 100,000 Kentuckians fought for the Union. In fact, there were the same amount of African American troops fighting for the Union in Kentucky, 25,000, as there were fighting in the Confederacy, which was also 25,000. You had 25,000 who fought for the Confederacy, 100,000 Kentuckians fought for the North, and 25,000 of them were black people. So they found their freedom in Kentucky. I think Camp Nelson. These are things that we should be proud of. We should be proud of that. 25,000 African Americans got their freedom as soon as they picked up the gun and decided to join the war. And that's the same amount as the white racists. Also, 75,000 whites, including German immigrants, such as William Justice Goebbels' father, fought for the United States of America. And we fought to remain in the United States of America, especially since the Confederacy was the one who broke our neutrality. We said we were going to be neutral, but the Confederates said, fuck their neutrality, and they invaded our land. So we sided with the Union, and then we won. We won. The United States of America won. Kentucky won the Civil War. South Carolina lost. So good for Kentucky for making the right decision in the 1860s. I mean, my God, the Confederates were the original terrorists. They were treasonous. They were fighting against the United States of America. Al-Qaeda, Confederates, KKK. Terrorism is when you attack civilians for political purposes. So it's not surprising that the ex-Confederates then became the KKK, and the KKK dressed in white bed sheets in order to be perceived as the dead Confederate ghost coming back to life. Racism, slavery, terrorism, treason to the United States. These are horrible legacies in 1860, let alone 2015. The federal government's Common Core standards is world-class standards. It was designed by many states, pushed by the states in order for the entire United States to be competitive with the world's educational attainment. Since we're not number one anymore, we're like 50. So we want to compete with the international educational standards. If we want to actually produce smart people that's just as smart as any Swedish, German, Luxembourgish, Chinese, Japanese, any of these other countries. We need to up our game. We need to have Common Core standards. So it makes no sense. I grew up on Common Core. I grew up on CARA, okay, which was actually more sweeping than Common Core standards. I remember everybody complaining about it, especially the teachers, which is ironic because the teachers were even threatening to strike over them being tested. They were pissed because now we were going to hold them accountable and actually test them to see if they were even teaching the kids. So what a bunch of hypocrites. They hated to be tested even more than the students do. Teachers pass tests out to the students every day. But as soon as teachers was going to be tested on their performance, on whether or not they were teaching, they were up in arms, ready to strike over it. So, little Billy and Lily Sally, they can't read. But who gives a fuck? Here you go, teacher. Here's $55,000 anyways for 8 months of wasting everybody's time. Get the fuck out of here. If you wasted 8 months of everybody's time and you didn't teach a single student, you should be fired. You should be fired immediately. You're a failure. You're a loser at what you do. The Kentucky Education Reform Act of 1990, aka CARA, was a complete overhaul of Kentucky's public educational system. So it wasn't just standards, there was a lot of things with CARA. CARA implemented the SEEK formula so that the poorest schools would get the same amount of tax dollars that the richest schools got on a per-student basis, and that's revolutionary. Poor schools aren't even getting the same tax dollars today, but at least it was mandated that way in 1990. It's the law. And so there's no reason why Barberville, which receives about $9,000 of taxpayer dollars per student, should be getting half the tax dollars compared to Anchorage, who gets about $18,000 per student. In 1990, Kentucky districts only received $2,305 per student on average. So that number has gone up. A Sudbury model of education, which is a dream, true blue freedom and democracy school. It costs less than $5,000. Vouchers would have our schools democratic and civic minded in no time. They can't treat us just like bricks in the wall anymore. No more 100% compliance. No more shut up, sit down, and watch the teacher just lecture on and on and on about how much they know. Instead, we have a discovery-based, an inquiry-based education where the student's own curiosity governs their learning. Self-education is the only type of education anyways. Plus, it also includes the parents, which we need to have the students and the parents involved in the decision making of what gets taught in the schools, because those are the two most important actors. In fact, I would like to see long-term analysis. Where do the students eventually go? Did they get good jobs? Did they go and do well in society? Or was this just one big long jail sentence for our children to brainwash them to, for whatever reason, to make them obedient and stupid so they don't protest war, they don't protest poverty, so they don't know who the government officials are, they don't vote, and, the other myriad of problems that we have. So, vouchers, I think, is a great idea. It gives the power to the parent, and if the public schools want to keep the students, well, you got to prove to us that you're actually doing something. Sudbury model schools are cheaper, and it's a better education. They teach democratic institutions, so they teach our students, our children, to get along with one another, to tolerate people's opinions that they don't agree with, so that, and also for them to defend their positions, to stand up and to defend their positions. These are good things. So vouchers give parents and students more choices when it comes to their own education, and it's supposed to be for the students and parents, but so far it's only been for the administrators. The person who learns the most in a traditional American classroom is the teacher. When you teach others, you retain 90% of all that you teach. But when you just wrote memorization, sit and get the sage on the stage and just worship them, you only retain 5% of that. In fact, if you just read the material, you would retain 10%. So if the teachers would just shut up and give them the books, you've already taught the students twice as much as what you would have taught in a traditional Prussian industrial model classroom. So all Kentucky schools should be based on the Sudbury Valley Model School. If we're not learning democracy in our classrooms, where are we learning democracy from? Where are we learning democratic institutions from? How our system of government, our democratic republic, actually works. There's no reason why a school cannot be fun and empowering at the same time. In fact, that's how you teach. You get the kid interested in it, and once they're curious about it, they will want to learn it forever. But if you force somebody to learn math that they don't understand and just shut up and do what I tell you, they're going to hate math. They're going to hate math for the rest of their life. And we need math. We need smart people coming up out of our schools. There's lots of things Norway, Sweden are doing. The Kentucky Education Reform Act of 1990 also gave Kentucky SBDMs, Site-Based Decision-Making Councils. This gave parents power to choose Kentucky's curriculum in the 1990s. Again, this is not centralized bureaucratic control. It's in the state, local governments. SBDMs have to select 3 teachers, 1 administrator, and at least 2 parents to decide the curriculum of their local school. That happened in 1990. The SBDMs are one lever that gave some power to the parents. It's not much because there's only 2 parents and then, 4 school officials, but it's a democratizing force. So naturally, tyrannical superintendents would hate them. The primary responsibility of the SBDMs are as follows. Hiring to fill vacancies in all school staff positions, including teachers and principals. So 2 parents in the community had the power to hire and fire new teachers and principals, choosing textbook instructional materials, and student support services available at the school. So who's choosing the textbooks? The local school boards were. Reviewing CATS testing. It was curious back then. They changed it to CATS results in determining steps to ensure student improvement. So to look at the test scores, see what we can do. Assessing school improvement plans mandated by the No Child Left Behind Act. So, No Child Left Behind was also standards-based movement. So we already did this. We did No Child Left Behind in 1990 with the standards. Standards are a good thing. If you just have no standards, then what are you saying? Just do whatever the hell the teacher makes up at any given day? No, you got to have standards. You got to have some. This is what we're going to give your child after 13 years of this prison. They will be capable of, being able to pay their bills, get a job, home economics, balance a checkbook, etc. So in an effort to decentralize authority within the school system, Kara delegated much of the curriculum decision-making to the school-based decision-making councils. Under Kara, these councils determine what is taught, the text used in the classrooms, the extracurricular activities will be offered, and a large extent, those who will be teaching. Kara also introduced computers into the classroom. Computers, technology, we're the internet generation. And we're going to die of ignorance, which is ironic, too. Generation Y and the millennial generations are smarter than Generation X and back. Smarter than Generation X and smarter than their lazy and heavily entitled Social Security loving baby boomer parents. They love that welfare. Kentucky's youth and young adults are more technologically astute and therefore they are more evolved. In fact, our students in Kentucky were the 10th in the nation. So they passed Common Core in 2010. Our scores weren't that great in 2011, 2013, but 2013 and 14, we are the 10th smartest. So our students have rose to the expectations, and they are doing very well in our school system. Unfortunately, it's the adults who are the problem. Kentucky's youth and young adults are more technologically astute, so therefore they're more evolved. They're smarter. The Kentucky old are pea-brain dinosaurs who can't even read, clinging on to an ancient Bronze Age, Dark Ages tradition. And the Kentucky youth are Einsteins. They're absolute geniuses, hundreds of times smarter than their parents. And they're patiently waiting for a Kentucky enlightenment. The love song of J. Alfred Prufrock by T.S. Eliot documents very well how scared the old are that the young will one day replace them. That's one of the biggest fears of the old, but it shouldn't be. The old should be helping us figure out a way to get new jobs in industries and into good schools. Because if they don't do that, then they should be replaced. They are keeping their positions so that way nobody else can get them. Well, that's not empowering. Kentucky's Common Math, English, and Science Core standards isn't anything new here. Kentucky already had many of the same standards already in place since Kentucky led the standards-based movement in 1990 with the passage of Kara. Terry Holliday's 2010 implementation of Common Core piggybacked off of Kara, Kentucky's educational reform in 1990. Here are some of the Kara standards that were implemented in 1990. Okay? So, and actually, well, take a look at this, okay? So here are the standards for Kara in 1990. So we wanted the students to use basic communication and mathematical skills for purposes and situations they will encounter throughout their lives. We want the students of Kentucky to develop their abilities to apply core concepts and principles from mathematics, sciences, arts, humanities, social studies, practical living studies, and vocational studies that they will encounter throughout their lives. So that's actually higher standards than just math and English and science, which is what Terry Holliday, in 2010 implemented. So in 1990, Kentucky was saying we want some vocational studies, we want practical living studies, social studies, humanities, arts, sciences, and of course, math and English. We also wanted them to develop their abilities to become self-sufficient individuals, develop their abilities to become responsible members of a family, work group, and community, including demonstrating effectiveness in community service. They also, the Kentucky students were expected to develop their abilities to think and solve problems in school situations and in a variety of situations they will encounter in life. Kentucky students was also expected to develop their abilities to connect and integrate experiences and new knowledge from all subject matter fields with what they previously learned and build on past learning experiences to acquire new information through various media services. In the middle of the 90s, they eventually tinkered a little bit with the curriculum, and they got rid of the math portfolios. I remember doing the math portfolios, and, school, I hate the 100% compliance of school. I hate the lack of democracy, the lack of civic understanding. This is something that Kenny Imes had said, that we need to bring back civics. This is also something that Will T. Scott had said. Will T. Scott had said that we're not teaching Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett anymore. Davy Crockett wasn't born in Kentucky, and then eventually, he went out. But Daniel Boone is definitely integral to Kentucky history. We learned Kentucky history in the 4th grade. 4th grade, so you're barely learning about, the state symbols, the regions, just very little about Kentucky history. That should be a high school class. Kentucky history, civics, understanding the local positions. What do the PVA and the surveyor and the assessor, the constables, we should understand what these positions do. And we should also understand our civic duty in a democratic republic is to go vote. 90% of Kentuckians will not go vote because the system has failed them. It doesn't change a thing. There's no good candidates. They're not inspired to actually go vote. And also maybe ignorance. They had bad education and media. The media doesn't do a good job. It's all about the personal bullshit instead of their policies. So we need to be smart. And when we look at Common Core, 45 states agreed to do some type of Common Core standards. 45 states are not wrong. That's all of America. So all of a sudden, we're smarter than all of America? Massachusetts, Minnesota, Oregon, Alaska, Washington, California. These are states with great educational systems. The states who opted out of doing any type of Common Core were the dumb states, like Louisiana, home of Bobby Jindal, who also opted out of Obamacare. So therefore, every poor person that dies of a preventable death that happens in Louisiana, Bobby Jindal should be personally liable for. And then Oklahoma. We should do what Washington and Minnesota is doing, not what Oklahoma is doing. Oklahoma, home of the pirate political party. It has thousands of earthquakes because of their addiction to fracking. Fracking, which is coal's biggest competitor. They're causing earthquakes in Oklahoma. The leadership is, and the people ain't stopping it. Oklahoma's legislator this year also tried to make yoga pants illegal. They introduced a bill to make yoga pants illegal. Because evidently, yoga pants gives Oklahoma's legislators the urge to rape. They can't control themselves, so they want to control what women wear. But hell, Kentuckians should understand that feeling since we've been getting raped by the coal companies for years. Louisville and Grant County jailers literally rape their inmates, even innocents falsely beat up by crooked cops and those in there for victimless crimes or for some misdemeanor or traffic violation. And Grant County jailers and Louisville jailers is the only ones that we know about. And that's a hell of a punishment for speeding. You got caught speeding, you go to jail, you get raped. That's justice, that's fair. The speedster hurt nobody but the public official being paid with tax dollars raped another person. Am I the only one that believes that rape, murder, stealing, violence are evil? Am I the only one that believes those are the biggest, wickedest things that a society can do? Wickedness that deserves punishment? Wickedness that peaceful, civilized society should stop? But let's look at our electric prices. Just recently, Will T. Scott at the Energy Conference said that the coal companies are buying our electricity rates at 3 cents a kilowatt hour.
Look at your savings. I mean, my God, all we have to do is think and work together. And on the energy, we've got no new coal systems coming online. The fluidized bed method. Come on. These old plants that they complain about up here on the river, they were built in the 1960s. We got plants now that can produce electricity at 3 cents a kilowatt wholesale. Now you're not getting it for 3 cents, but they're going to sell it for 3 cents. Wholesale.
3 cents. That's it. 3 pennies. My electricity is 10 cents. I'm paying 10 cents per kilowatt hour. That's the same nationally. I save no money being in a coal state. I don't save a single penny. Instead, what they're doing, Pennsylvania Power and Light, which is owned by William H. Spence, used to be called Kentucky Utilities. It's owned by Pennsylvania CEOs. They buy our electricity for 3 cents a kilowatt hour, turn it around and sell it to us for 10 cents a kilowatt hour. They're making 7 cents per kilowatt hour of electricity. That is more than 200% markup. We should have, this is our coal. It should be 3 cents. We should sell coal electric prices wholesale to Kentucky citizens. We all should have 3 cents per kilowatt hour. I had a bill over the winter, $400 bill. It matches my mortgage. My electric and my mortgage should not be the same. And $400 because of the 200% markup. But if we were to cut that down by 33%, now I'm paying $100. That's reasonable. $133. That's reasonable. $400, that's fucking ridiculous. And then they don't have any, they'll cut you off right in the middle of winter. They'll arrest the nogglers, saying that they aren't providing a decent living situation for their kids. But the coal company would cut the electricity off the nogglers in a heartbeat and not give one iota, not give one tiny little piece of not give a, just not care. So that's incredible. If we cut out the middleman, cut out the coal company operators, transnational corporations, the Pennsylvania CEOs, and we just provide electricity generated by burning coal for ourselves, we'd see our electric bills cut by a third. So the Nogglers were able to give birth in 30-degree weather during the last winter, which is impressive. Living off the grid, they didn't pay for any electricity cost. How did they stay warm out there? You want to arrest them for saying that they're not taking care of their own children. Well, the Kentucky politicians hasn't been taking care of the Kentucky people for generations. The Kentucky politicians should be arrested for this. This is price gouging. This, Jack Conway's suing Marathon for price gouging. This is price gouging by the electric companies. We're supposed to be a big coal state, but so far thousands of coal miners have lost their jobs this year. We haven't filed an EPA plan. Why are the coal miners losing their jobs? Because coal is dirty and coal is expensive. We should nationalize coal. It is our coal to begin with, and we can take the coal, the state takes the coal, and then the profits goes to our schools, goes to the hospitals, goes for having a better infrastructure for all of us. And then, we could also have it unionized and make sure that the jobs are safe. The EPA hasn't imposed any standards yet. Kentucky has fought those regulations off. So why are we still losing coal miners' jobs? Mitch McConnell's been in office the whole time, and we've been losing coal miner jobs for decades. And what can possibly stem this arsenic-laden coal ash pond from bursting all over the trailer parks lined up along the creeks and rivers? We should nationalize coal. Kentucky is a commonwealth, and all the raw materials of the state, most especially in national parks, belong to us, we the people. We should nationalize coal and keep our own coal instead of thinking some Pennsylvania CEO who is just wanting to maximize his profits for his stockholder investors, pretending like he cares about us. He doesn't care about us. They don't care about us. King Coal politicians, they don't give a shit about us. Most Eastern Kentuckians do not even have running water. They don't have running water. And if you can't get municipal water out into the mountains, let's build some wells. We're beggars sitting on a mound of gold. And that's so stupid. Look at Bolivia. Bolivia is using their natural resources and making a better life for Bolivians. We should do that if we had politicians that actually cared about us instead of just about the 1% big banking corporate CEOs from Pennsylvania. So, they don't care about us. Most Eastern Kentuckians don't have running water, but they do have a coal severance tax. Somehow, some way, some Kentuckians stood up and said, no, if you're going to sit there and take our resources, pollute our streams, and do all this horse shit, you're going to give us a tax. You're going to pay us some money. And that should be studied. The history on how the coal severance tax of Eastern Kentucky was implemented should be studied. Because it's amazing that Eastern Kentucky was ever able to get the King Coal companies to do a single fucking thing for them.